What's going on, guys? It's Super TT here, and today I'm bringing you a guide for tuning in Forza Horizon 2. Now, there are a lot of parts to tuning, so I'm not going to do all of it in this video. I'm just going to do tyres, gearing and alignment. So this is the car I have tested all of these things on. This is my BMW 1 Series S1 class, and it's a good all-round car which I thought would be good for testing. I found a place in San Giovanni where I literally do laps of San Giovanni to test out the handling and other aspects of the car. So, if we go back quickly, by tuning, I mean I'm talking about these things here, the setup of the car essentially, as opposed to the upgrades, which are these. I can do a guide for these later. But for now, this is going to be a guide on tuning. So I'm going to focus on these first three things here: tyres, gearing and alignment. So for tyres, this should be unlocked straight away. You shouldn't have to buy any upgrades to unlock this. So essentially, I tested this. I didn't have to test this too much, but what I did to begin with is I put very high pressure in both front and back just to see what would happen. Now, what the game says is that with higher pressure you increase the responsiveness and the speed, but there might be a sudden loss of grip. And I couldn't notice the sudden loss of grip, if I'm honest, but it wouldn't. The responsiveness and speed, I didn't really notice a huge difference either. And I also tested lower pressure, so like I tested 15 and 15 front and rear. Essentially what this does is it heats up the tyres faster, but is less responsive. So essentially what this does is your tyres will heat up faster, but the grip level they get to won't be as high. So if you put it a bit higher, it'll take longer to heat up, but the grip level they get to will be higher. So I don't really notice, if I'm honest, when I'm playing the game, I don't really notice a big difference in the tyres warming up. I don't feel as though the tyres have more grip, say at the end of a race, or like after a few minutes of driving, rather than once you just start driving. As in, I don't notice the tyres heating up. I don't really notice that effect, if I'm honest. But this is the setup I stuck with in the end, which is to go. Well, the standard setup is 30-30 front and rear, but I went 28-31 front and rear. Now, essentially, the reasoning I came up with is that the tyre that's more dense essentially has less grip. So what I've done here is put the rear with less grip. So essentially, what that does is on the front tyres determine your turn-in angle. So if you have good turning, you won't get any understeer basically, but if you have bad turning, you get lots of understeer. Now your rear tyres determine oversteer, so the higher it is, the more oversteer you'll get, and the lower it is, the less understeer you'll get. But if I'm honest, you want a bit of oversteer because it helps you get around that corner a bit more. And the reason I put front lower than the back is because it creates that turning angle. So you create a turning angle by putting a lower front that gets the car turned in, and then you put a bit higher on the back just to get that background a bit more, so you can corner a bit quicker. So your lateral G should be a bit higher if you do this. So that's the best I could come up with. Remember that this is for this BMW 1 Series. It's a four-wheel drive car. It doesn't always. All of these factors that I'm saying won't necessarily apply to every car, and especially not, or maybe not rear-wheel drive cars. It is perhaps better suited for four-wheel drive cars, this guide. But by all means, give it a go. I don't think tyres and alignment should affect too much if it's front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Now, or even front-wheel drive, I suppose. Okay, now moving on to gearing. You can see here that I haven't unlocked. I can't change all of the gears. I can change the final drive, but not the rest of the gears. So to unlock that, I'll show you how to do that. So you go to upgrades, custom upgrade. Now go to drivetrain and transmission. Now I've only got 3 options here. Normally there are 4 options. You normally have stock, then you have sport, then you have race, and then you have off-road. Now I've got 3 of those options. If you put in the sport one, this will mean you can put in final drive. Although in this car I've only got the stock one, there isn't a sport one, so they've let me do final drive. But if you want to change all of the gears separately, you have to put in the race transmission. I'm not sure about the off-road one, I haven't tested it, but yeah, race transmission if you want to change all of the gears. Okay, so for this car, the standard ratio for the final drive was 4.1, and I tested it on a large motorway. There's a few motorways in the game, just find a long motorway and you can test the acceleration on top speed. And I put it up slightly to 4.25. Now the higher it is, the better it is for acceleration. The lower it is, the more suited for top speed it will be. But my personal opinion on Forza Horizon 2 is that there aren't many opportunities where you're going to be using top speed unless you're doing drag racing or whatever. But if you're just doing standard racing, then you're probably not going to be using top speed very much. That is why I rate acceleration higher. So you can see on the graph at the bottom right, if I put this all the way up, each of those lines represents a gear, and you can see that they all move closer together. Now if I move that to 6.1, then the top speed of this car would be about 130, and if I move it all the way to the left, which is for speed, you can see that the graph goes off the page, and on third gear there, that's 200 miles an hour in third gear, which is quite ridiculous. It would take so long to get there that it just wouldn't be worth it. So I settled for 4.25 on this car. Now each car will have a different setting. It's down to what the gearbox, how many teeth are in the gears. This car's 4.1. I put it up to 4.25. Obviously it's up to you what you want, but I would recommend putting a bit more towards acceleration. You can put, I mean, if I were to put it up to say like 5, now the top speed would become about 160, and the gears will be really fast to begin with. So you've got 6 gears and you're changing up to, I don't know, 5th gear by about 100 miles an hour, which is really fast, because remember, every gear shift that you do, you can't accelerate during a gear shift. You lose that slight bit of speed, so you got too many gears there basically, and you're not going to accelerate as fast. I'd say 4.25 is a good balance. So yeah, you just have to test it, I suppose. Just test on a motorway, see what feels good, and also try testing it around the track, because you need to make sure that you're coming out ideally from the slowest corners in 2nd or 3rd gear. You don't want to have to dip down into 1st gear really, if I'm honest, because from what I can tell from my experience of that 1st gear, if you're having to dip down to 1st gear, that's not a good thing normally. Okay, now finally alignment. This is quite a tough one to call. These are my final settings that I settled with. Now to be able to unlock these, if you don't buy the springs and dampers, you won't be able to change them. So go on to upgrades, custom upgrade, platform handling, and springs and dampers. Now if you put in the sport springs and dampers, you won't be able to change anything. Neither if you just leave the stock one in. You have to buy the race one. Then you can change camber, toe and caster, which is what you want here. Now if I go back to tuning, okay, so if I go to alignment, now this is what I settled on finally. I put in -2 negative camber, and I left the rear camber the same. So essentially what camber is, negative camber is where the tops of the tyres face inwards. So if you've ever seen those Stance Nation cars where the tyres are sort of leaning sideways, that's camber. That's extreme negative camber, where the tyres are leaning inwards at the top. You can do positive, which is the other way around, but normally you just want a little bit of negative. That helps the car to turn in slightly. Now what I settled with here is 2 degrees negative, but nothing on the back. This I found just helps you turn in that a little bit better, But the rear, I didn't think the rear would help either, as well, should I say. I tested many settings. I did like extreme negative camber at the front and extreme positive at the back, and I found that was good for drifting. It oversteered, the car oversteered quite a lot, but it was manageable. So if you're drifting, then I think that's a good setup for drifting. Extreme negative at the front, extreme positive at the back, and I also tested it the other way around. So positive at the front and negative at the rear, and this was extremely. This is like the opposite, basically, as you'd expect. It was very stiff, and there's very little grip. So you turn around the corner, the car just didn't want to turn in. It wouldn't it would understeer, it wouldn't oversteer, but it just wouldn't really turn at all. So I wouldn't recommend that setting at all. So essentially, this is a bit like tyres. Your front camber decides how well the car turns in. Negative seems to make it turn in better, and then your rear camber decides the rear of the car, essentially, like how much it oversteers. So you can put that higher, but it creates oversteer. I just left it 0. This is good for just racing, by the way, race tune. So drifting, put that higher, and for racing, keep that minus. I did go to minus 2.5, but then you'll see later on caster that you can get away with a lower negative front camber if you put a higher front caster. So essentially my tips for this would be: front camber decides how well the car turns in, negative is better. Rear camber decides how well the car grips or oversteers, positive is better. Put it as high as you can get away with without the car drifting, unless you want drifting if you are a drifter. Okay, now we move on to toe. So essentially what toe is, if you imagine, if you're looking down from the top of the car, the fronts of the tyres will face in towards each other if you put toe in, and if you put toe out, then the fronts of the tyres will face away from each other. Now, the settings that I settled for in the end were 0.8 on the front going out, and 0.4 on the back going out as well. So essentially what happens here is toe in creates stability, but it reduces the turn-in angle, so you'll get more oversteer, but the car will feel more stable. And obviously for out, it's the opposite, so the car will become less stable, but your turn-in angle will be better. And that is why you want stability, but also you do want turn-in angle. That's why I have only a small amount of out. It's hard to explain stability, how they define it, because when I was testing it, the car became very it wouldn't change direction, and it just became quite hard to steer on the straights. So that's why I've only gone for a small amount of toe out. The same principle applies here. You're trying to create a balance between the front and rear. So the front decides your turn in, and your rear, I would say, creates the stability. So I would normally just go twice as much on the front going out as on the rear. So 0.8 is double 0.4. But don't go too extreme. You can obviously experiment with it, but I would settle for something like that. The thing is that this car is very stable, so I could probably afford to go, a bit more, like 1.2, 0.6, because of how stable this car is. So most cars won't be as stable as this one. So essentially, the higher you put it, the less stable it will be, but the better it will turn in. But this car is pretty damn good as it is, so I was going to leave it as 0.8 and 0.4. So essentially here, you just want to put it as high as you can, as high as you can get away with before the car becomes unstable. So just test it, I don't know, say like 2 and 1. If the car becomes like unpredictable and hard to steer on the straights and won't change direction quickly, then just put it down I went for this, and that was a good setup. Now finally we move on to front caster or caster. This is essentially an angle between the steering axis and the wheels. It's fairly complex when you tie it in with camber. It's related to camber. Now essentially what you want is when you're driving in a straight line, you essentially want no camber at all. You want zero. You want this. You want... If your tyres are facing directly upwards, you get more speed on the straights, but that doesn't help you around corners. Around corners, you do want camber, because the angles of the tyres does help you get around a corner. So this creates a bit of a problem. Do you want speed on the straights, or do you want cornering? You can't have both, although you can make it better for each. So this is what you change caster for. I put standard setting is 5, but I moved up to 5.5. This allows you to run slightly less front negative camber. So if I went up to 3, that would be good on the corners, but it would be really bad on the straights. So you move your caster up slightly by half a degree, which allows you to move your negative camber down slightly, which will help you on the straights. It's very complex the way that tyres and suspension geometry works. Around corners it changes compared to when you're on a straight. It's hard to explain exactly why, but if you just put this setup, then your car should be okay. So just a recap very quickly. So on tyres, you don't have to buy any upgrades. You should be able to just change this straight away. Higher pressure on the rear, I would say, just by 2 or 3 degrees. Don't change it too much from the 30. I can't see much benefit of that. But just put higher at the back. This helps the car to turn in. The lower PSI on the front helps the front of the car to turn in. Then the rear helps with stability. So obviously you just need to create a difference between the two, which creates that turn-in angle at the front. Now as for gearing, this is a matter of opinion really, and what car you're using, what you're using your car for. So if you're using for drag racing, then it changes if you're a drifter or if you're a racer. But I mainly cover just for straight plain racing. So what I would normally go for is just change your final drive up slightly. The standard in this was 4.1. Just move up to 4.25 for acceleration. The higher it is, the better for acceleration it is. But I wouldn't change it much more than 0.2 or 0.3. Obviously, so don't go up to like something ridiculous like 5.5. I don't think that would help you very much. So to change the gearing, you need to buy the sport transmission to change the final drive, or the race transmission, and then you can change each gear individually. And then finally on alignment, buy the race springs and dampers, and then you can change all of these things. For camber, you want to create a difference between the front and rear like you do on tyres. Just put the front onto negative. Negative front camber helps you to turn in, and then positive or neutral rear camber helps the car become stable or grippy. The higher, if you put very high rear positive camber, then you get a lot of oversteer, which is good for drifting but not good for racing. But you can just put a little bit on there if you're not getting enough, if the car isn't oversteering that little bit. Because oversteer sounds bad, but it can be good for racing. You just want a tiny bit. It does help you get around the corners a bit better. And for toe, don't go too extreme here. Just put a slight bit of out, higher on the front than on the rear. And for caster, just go up by about half a degree, which helps you put a lower negative front camber. So I'm just going to go quickly onto my Super GT testing facility, we shall call it. Okay, so here we are in San Giovanni. I've got rid of all the markers on the map so you can see it a bit better. So essentially you're just doing a figure of 8 around here. So you come up here, got a hairpin, got a long right hander, long left hander, then left hand hairpin, a long right hander, a bit of a straight here. Then you've got a little right hander which has a bit of a you might go onto 2 wheels here, so it tests your stability as well. You come down here, you've got a long right hander, long left, long right. The thing that I find important is the long corners and the hairpins. That's where you can test your the alignment and the tyre settings. I noticed heavily on, especially on this corner down here. It's a very long corner, 180 degrees. You can just feel how different the settings are, like how well the car accelerates out of the corners, how well it turns. And I'll just do a lap of this circuit to show you what it's like. So you come down here, and you've got a big left-hand hairpin. So this little circuit that I've made has a lot of long corners, which is good for testing all these elements. You can see here the car is very stable, doesn't really oversteer very much, and it's very easy to control. So I do have a tune video for this car, which you can check on my channel. I think it's the first video on my channel, on the main page. Another benefit of this little circuit is that it has a speed trap there, so you can compare your settings and how quick you get for that speed trap. So you come down here, now this is that long right hand corner I was talking about. You can really push the car around here. It's a long corner, so you can really feel how the difference in the settings. And then you follow this road, bears to the left and then it bears to the right. So you can test the change in direction. It also goes down a bit of a dip, which is nice. And then that's one lap of that little circuit done. So you can also use this to test out your settings. Now if you're going to test your final drive and gear settings, I could probably go here and drive up that motorway, or here just north of Sisteron, and there's a long motorway there as well, fairly straight and wide, which is important, so you don't want to crash into the traffic cars. So yeah, San Giovanni, that little circuit there, is probably where I recommend testing. So I do hope this video has helped you guys. There's a lot to it. I perhaps haven't explained it the best I possibly could have done. So if you're unsure of anything, just post a comment in the comment section below. I do read all the comments, so don't think that I'm not reading them. I will try and get an answer to you as soon as I can if you are unsure of anything. So give me a like if you can, please. This video's I put a lot of effort into this. It does take so long to test every little thing. And yeah, I do hope that you can subscribe to me, guys, if you haven't already. I'll be making plenty of guides and racing game videos. And yeah, that's it. I'll be bringing out the next. I'll also be carrying on with these guides. I've only covered 3 elements of the tuning, and I will also do upgrades if that's what you want as well. And yeah, that's it for me today. I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.